This is a presentation on American Eel Draft Addendum 7 for public comment, which addresses commercial yellow eel management and monitoring requirements. This presentation will include an overview of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, the statement of the problem, background information, a timeline for the development of this addendum, proposed management options, and information on how to provide public comments. The Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission was formed in 1942 as an interstate compact between the 15 Atlantic coast states from Maine through Florida. The Commission serves as a deliberative forum for those states to coordinate management for species in state waters, which is 0 to 3 miles from shore. While each state is represented on the Commission by 3 commissioners, each state gets 1 vote in the decision-making process. The Commission's American Eel Management Board includes the states from Maine through Florida and also includes the District of Columbia, the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Draft Addendum 7 addresses the poor stock condition of American eel and the fact that the assessment has not been able to provide biologically based reference points upon which to base management. Instead, commercial yellow eel has been managed since 2015 using a coastwide cap based on historical yellow eel landings. The recent 2023 assessment still wasn't able to provide biological reference points, but it did identify a trend-based tool that could be used to inform management, which is called iTarget. iTarget uses only the time series of coastwide landings and the Fishery Independent Abundance Index to provide catch advice. In August 2023, the board approved the recent American Eel Benchmark Stock Assessment for management use. And in response to the stock assessment findings and recommendation, the board initiated Draft Addendum 7 to address the coastwide catch of yellow eel by using the recommended iTarget tool to recommend a range of catch caps. This is a graph of the yellow eel abundance index, shown by the dashed gray line, and the coastwide yellow eel landings, shown by the black solid line. This shows the declines in both the abundance index and landings over time. The addendum also considers options to change some state monitoring requirements based on recommendations from the Stock Assessment Subcommittee and Technical Committee. First, the 2023 assessment indicated that the biological sampling that is required as part of the state's young of year surveys, specifically individual lengths and pigment stage, could be made optional because the data have not been able to inform trends in the stock. Additionally, it notes that the catch per unit effort, CPUE, data that's provided by the states have not been used in any of the stock assessments as was intended because they're not indicative of trends in the stock as a whole. The addendum was initiated in August 2023. In the fall, the plan development team developed management options and the draft addendum document. In January 2024, the board approved Draft Addendum 7 for public comment. And now in February and March of 2024, the Commission is seeking public comment on the addendum through state public hearings and written comments. The board intends to take final action on this addendum in May of 2024. The proposed management options in Draft Addendum 7 are organized by the issue they address. Section 3.1 considers options on the coastwide yellow eel harvest cap and the management response to exceeding the cap. Section 3.2 considers the time frame for the yellow eel cap provisions. Section 3.3 considers requirements of the annual young of year abundance surveys. Section 3.4 considers the catch and effort monitoring program requirements, and Section 3.5 addresses the designation of de minimis status. Section 3.1, Issue 1, deals with the yellow eel coastwide harvest cap. The yellow eel fishery has been managed under a coastwide harvest cap since 2015. The current coastwide cap is 916,473 pounds, based on the average yellow eel landings from 1998 to 2010. The status quo option 1 would maintain that coastwide cap. There are 4 additional options which propose a range of alternative harvest caps using the iTarget tool. As mentioned, iTarget is a trend-based tool that can be used for managing data-limited fisheries like eel. It only needs data from landings and abundance indices to provide management advice, and these are available data sets for yellow eel. With this information, iTarget can provide a range of catch limit recommendations based on the trends in catch and abundance, as well as management goals defined by the board. Essentially, the data inputs provide iTarget with information on where we were or the past trends in eel abundance and catch, where we are, which is the current relative abundance level, and where we want to be, which is a target abundance level that management is aiming to achieve. The output that iTarget provides is how to get to that target abundance by setting a coast-wide harvest cap. So with the historical catch and abundance trends, the current relative abundance level, and the target abundance level, iTarget will give us a recommended catch cap that aims to achieve the abundance target. That was the basics of iTarget, but there are also 3 variables or knobs that need to be adjusted when using iTarget. These are the reference period, multiplier, and threshold. The reference period is meant to be a time period where the population is stable or at a desirable abundance level. This is the historical period of time that we will be comparing the target abundance to. The multiplier is what establishes the target abundance or where we want to be. If the multiplier is set to 1, that means you are aiming to achieve the same abundance from the reference period. If you set the multiplier to 1.25, that means you are aiming to achieve an abundance level that is 25% higher than the abundance from the reference period. The threshold value is a setting of iTarget that depends on the goals of the fishery and the amount of risk managers are willing to tolerate. The value can be between 0.5 and 0.8, and a lower threshold is less conservative, more risk tolerant, and would generally result in higher catch caps, whereas a higher threshold is more conservative, less risk tolerant, and generally results in lower catch caps. So in the options that use iTarget to recommend a catch cap, there are 2 different reference periods being considered, which are identified by the yellow and blue shaded areas in the graph. These 2 reference periods were based on distinct periods identified in the assessment where the abundance levels are different from each other. The blue area is the earlier reference period, 1974 to 1987. In this reference period, the abundance index was higher, which means the population was bigger relative to later years. The yellow area is the more recent reference period, 1988 to 1999, which is a period of lower abundance, but the population was still larger than in the most recent decades. This table shows the 4 proposed options for coastwide caps based on iTarget. Options 2 and 3 both use the earlier reference period and a multiplier value of 1.25. This means they are both aiming to achieve stock abundance that's 25% greater than the average abundance from 1974 to 1987. They differ in that option 2 uses a threshold of 0.8, which is again the more conservative threshold with a lower risk tolerance, resulting in a coastwide cap of 202,453 pounds. Option 3 alternatively uses a threshold of 0.5, which is the less conservative threshold with higher risk tolerance, resulting in a coastwide cap of 518,281 pounds. Options 4 and 5 use the more recent reference period of 1988 to 1999, and they both use a threshold value of 0.5. However, option 4 uses a multiplier of 1.5 and option 5 uses a multiplier of 1.25. This means these 2 options are aiming for 2 different levels of stock abundance. Option 4 is aiming for 50% greater abundance than the average abundance from 1988 to 1999, and option 5 is aiming for 25% greater than the average abundance from 1988 to 1999. This is how the options compare in terms of the abundance level they are aiming to achieve. The target abundance increases from the bottom up, so options 2 and 3 both aim for the highest level of relative abundance. Option 5 aims for the lowest relative abundance, and option 4 is between those 2. In this graph, you can see the different coastwide caps that would result from each of the proposed options compared to the current coastwide cap and coastwide yellow eel landings since 2015, shown by the yellow bars. The current cap has not been exceeded since 2016. Of the alternative options, option 5 would result in the highest cap. Landings have not exceeded that level since 2018, so functionally it has the least potential to reduce fishing mortality on the yellow eel stock. The caps under options 3 and 4 are very similar, and landings have not exceeded those levels since 2019. Option 2 produces the lowest coastwide harvest cap, and landings have exceeded this cap in all years since 2015. So functionally, it has the most potential to reduce fishing mortality. Now we're moving on to the management response to exceeding the coastwide cap. The status quo option is that if coastwide landings exceed the cap by 10% for 2 consecutive years, then the states whose landings are greater than 1% of the coastwide landings in those years will be responsible for reducing landings to achieve the coastwide cap in the following year. Option 2 would modify this response so that states whose landings are greater than 5% of the coastwide landings would be responsible for reducing landings to achieve the coastwide cap in the following year. This option is responding to the fact that as total landings have declined drastically, states with very minimal landings are still winding up contributing more than 1% of the total. In this table, all of the shaded cells, yellow and gray, are states whose landings are over 1% of the coastwide total in each year since 2014. Option 1, status quo, means if the cap were exceeded, all of those states would have to reduce landings in the following year. The gray shaded cells in this table show the states whose landings were greater than 5% of the coastwide total in each year. Option 2 means only these states with gray shading would have to reduce landings if the cap was exceeded. The next set of options are related to the time frame for the yellow eel cap provisions. Option 1 is that the cap would not have a sunset date, so unless the board did a new addendum or amendment, it would stay in place. But the cap would have to remain in place for 3 years before being updated. The 3-year minimum time frame is recommended because fewer than 3 years of data with the cap in place would not be enough to evaluate the performance of the cap. Option 2 is that the cap would again not have a sunset date, but that it would have to remain in place for 5 years before being updated. 5 years is recommended because it would be more robust for evaluating and updating the cap. In each of these options, the board would be able to update the cap after the number of years specified. This means additional years of catch and index data would be run through the iTarget tool using the same reference period, multiplier, and threshold. It would not allow for changes to be made to those values. If changes to the configuration are desired, it would require a new addendum. Section 3.3 contains options related to the young of year survey sampling. This sampling is performed by state staff, so these options would not affect fishermen. Option 1 is status quo, which would mean the states must continue to collect individual length and pigment stage data on the eels sampled during the young of year surveys. And option 2 is that the biological sampling of length and pigment stage would become optional. As mentioned, this was a recommendation from the Stock Assessment Subcommittee and Technical Committee in the 2023 assessment to ease the monitoring burden on states. Section 3.4 contains options regarding the fishery-dependent catch and effort monitoring requirements. Currently, under Addendum 1, the states are required to collect harvester reports of trip-level CPUE data. Under Option 1, states would continue to require trip-level CPUE data in harvester reports, including soak time, number of units of gear fished, and pounds landed. Option 2 is that states would no longer be required to collect trip-level CPUE data for yellow eel catch. States could continue to require these data if they choose to do so. This option does not apply to glass eel fisheries, which would still have to report CPUE data. Section 3.5 addresses the de minimis policy for American eel. De minimis status is granted to states by request if their landings are less than 1% of the coastwide total, and having de minimis status exempts the state from fishery-dependent monitoring and management measures. For eel, the FMP states that in order to qualify for de minimis status, a state's landings must be less than 1% of the average landings of the last 2 years. But the Commission recently updated the de minimis policy to use a 3-year average instead of a 2-year average. So this addendum considers changing the eel fishery management plan requirement to a 3-year average. Option 1, status quo, would be to continue using the average landings for the last 2 years to evaluate de minimis status. And Option 2 would be to apply the Commission policy to eel, meaning a state could be de minimis if the average landings for the last 3 years is less than 1% of the coastwide landing. That completes the review of the proposed management options. After the public comment period for Addendum 7 ends in March, the board will consider the public input and consider final action on the addendum in May 2024. If the addendum is approved, the board would then determine the implementation dates for the selected management measures. The next slides will review information on providing public comments. The Commission has scheduled 7 public hearings to gather input on Draft Addendum 7. The 3 shown in this table will be conducted by webinar. If you would like to provide comments during a public hearing, you can attend any of the virtual public hearings, regardless of your state. The registration link can be found on the Commission's calendar webpage. There are also 2 public hearings that will be conducted in person in Virginia and Maryland, and 1 hybrid hearing in Delaware that can be attended in person or via webinar. If you would like to submit written comments on this action, you can send them by mail or email. Comments can be emailed to comments@asmfc.org using the subject line Yellow Eel Draft Addendum. You can mail comments to the Commission's office at the address listed here. The deadline for public comments is 11:59 p.m. on March 24th, 2024. Comments received after this time will not be considered by the board. The full Draft Addendum 7 document can be found on the Commission's website at www.asmfc.org/about-us/public-input. Thank you for listening to this presentation.